And welcome to MABA Sunday mornings. My name is Jeff, and I'm going to talk today about skillfully interacting with the six senses. So when we say six senses in Buddhism, we have the eye, the ear, the nose, the tongue, body, and mind. And basically these six senses are what create what we see and what we perceive. All we really have are the six senses. So as we're, going through the world, there could be a disaster somewhere in the world, but we don't know anything about it. It just basically all we see is what we've perceived in this moment. And that's what creates our reality and our future. And obviously there are other things happening in the world, but as far as we're concerned, from interacting with them and how to deal with them, we have the six senses that color who we become. So the question though is, why would we be concerned with this? So let me just move my little bar out of the way here. Okay. So essentially, we have the past, which is gone. The future, we have a number of choices that we can make, and all of those will lead to different places. So we're at a point in basically every moment where we can control our fate through following the process that the Buddha taught to train our mind. So if you don't like something about your life, then, here's how to change it. If there's nothing wrong with your life, you feel like everything's going great, well, it also pays to be concerned about the training, the six senses, because essentially if something or when something does go wrong that causes you to suffer, this is how you suffer less. So whenever we're talking about training the mind, essentially, we're talking about things like meditation, but it's also about the specifics about how we're dealing with thoughts and how we're interacting with thoughts in meditation and in daily life. So some of that is important in the fact that what we see and what we come into contact with, what we choose to put into our eyes and our mouth and things like that do create our future. So we have to be careful. But that doesn't mean that you can't ever eat something that you don't like or deal with, watching something that might have, scenery in it that might cause a little bit of restlessness, because it's all about how you're interacting with it and you're perceiving and dealing with that thought. But anyway, all of these six senses essentially create our future. And so in every moment, we're basically faced with a choice. We can develop attachment and craving. We can continue to allow these to dictate our future, which is basically this next slide, dependent origination. So the Buddha taught that we come into existence, most people think of it on the large scale of dependent origination, how ignorance leads to mental formations, leads to consciousness, etc., as you can see on the screen, leading to, the conditions that create your sixth sense contact. Then contact with those, feeling, craving comes to pass, clinging comes to pass, becoming comes to pass. We're born, aging, suffering, and death are inevitable to follow. So there's also a smaller scale that we can look at with dependent origination. And that's how it happens. A teacher that I was watching recently talked about how it's similar to something like a helix or different shapes that you can look. If you see it in nature, you'll see it again in other places. There are many ways that it can manifest. Circles, squares, hexagons, things like that. They continue to appear within chemistry and within galactic formations, things like that. But today we're just going to look more at the small scale, because this applies to your thoughts too. And considering that the six senses one of those being mind, is what creates our situation in this moment and our future. That's pretty important, and maybe more important than the large scale, because in every moment, the way that we're interacting with our thoughts and dealing with them can lead to a future that is essentially continues the same patterns or breaks those patterns and gives you freedom to do something else. So I like simplifying things a lot. You can see I just basically took dependent origination, and if you think about it, really birth does lead to contact if we were to continue this circle all the way around. So this is more in the mind whenever we're seeing things come up, how thoughts can come into being and actions can come into being. So that's physical, mental, and verbal actions as well. So in essence, contact with the senses leads to birth, and therefore to eventual suffering of some kind. Suffering here with thoughts might mean unsatisfactory. So, for example, we can have pleasant thoughts that give rise to greater craving. For example, eating something like cake has sensations that are pleasant. It comes up, but if what you're doing in your mind is craving more and planning to get more and eating the next bite before you even get it in your mouth, essentially, not even tasting the food you're eating, then the supposed pleasant thought is unsatisfactory because it's just leading to greater craving and greater desire. So at the beginning, on the last slide, we had contact. That's it. Really the earlier points where you can really even with training, most people can't really just perceive contact itself. But so I like to sort of explain contact because it begins the chain of thoughts that come up and perceptions. So we have the external sense capacity, internal sense capacity, and consciousness, and these three come together to make contact. So the external senses are essentially things like the eye, without something that's the external sense is the thing that's being perceived. So for example, the laptop in front of me has light reflecting from it, and it has to exist as something to receive, basically to reflect into my eye. The internal is your ability, basically, to perceive that object. So that's like the eye. For example, some snakes have an organ that allows them to sense heat energy. We don't have that, so we can't sense heat energy, even though it's there in the external sense. We don't have the ability. And then these, together with the specific consciousness for that, the eye consciousness, for example, when we're perceiving something with the eye, comes together, and all in one, they produce contact. And then contact then produces raw feeling, not feelings, but feeling itself. And the feeling leads to craving. I like it, I don't like it, or I don't care. So I want to look at this again. Contact with the senses, contact with the external object, and the consciousness lead to feeling, craving, clinging, becoming, and then the birth of actions, which are thoughts, physical or verbal actions. So essentially, this is the birth of our future in every moment. Like I was saying, most people can't really just perceive contact itself. It's actually hard to get past craving and just perceive feeling without any feelings about that craving, any desire about it. So feeling is basically, like I said, the unpleasant, pleasant, or neutral. But craving is where it really seems easiest to me to really, in meditation and in life, to deal with these things on a really sort of visible level in the mind. Because during meditation, it's easy to see when things come to pass. You know, the thought is there, it's already there. It's pretty easy to see clinging most of the time, although it can be tricky, it can hide. Craving, you know if you like or don't like something. But just getting back to feeling itself is sometimes you have to get through all the craving, and then when it starts to die down, you get to the feeling. So we can deal with craving. If we break that chain of dependent origination at some point, then the rest of it doesn't come to pass. So what is craving, though? It's wanting things to be different from the way that they are. So things like anxiety, desire, things you feel, they call them the hindrances in meditation, but greed for more of something, for example, in the cake example I gave, desire for sense contact of some kind, can feel lust or wanting more of something, wanting something to stop. Sometimes it's hatred or frustration, projecting frustration in situations that come up into your mind, or fear. And fear is supposed to be a weak form of anger that's kind of turned in on itself. Or sometimes there's just delusion that comes up, you know, wanting the wrong things or wanting things that hurt yourself. But it really all just comes down to wanting something to be something that it's not. A lot of meditation, and the practice in general, we're just trying to be more in this moment, trying to be okay with the things that come up in this moment. And when we're not, when we don't like that, when it's unpleasant, it causes some stress, some tension and tightness. So when you get experience with meditation, you can feel this. If you're not experienced, you can feel it in things like tension headaches. And when you do get good at meditation, you can actually, if you're dealing with the object of your meditation appropriately and moving back to it with right effort and right concentration, you can watch these dissolve. So basically, these things where you don't want something to be there, or you want something to be there, and that's different from what's actually happening, builds up and creates a cycle that basically feeds on itself. So I just thought this was a cute picture, but I will use the example of eating cake as another one here. So I'll tell you from experience that dealing with craving, tension, and stress as they arise can cause some unhappiness or can be dealt with skillfully. So I know yesterday I had cake for the first time in probably months. So I have in the past been someone who struggled with weight, wanting to always eat more, never feeling satisfied. So this is something of a little bit of a trigger, and you have to be careful. So once I do have a little bit, often something wakes up in my mind and says, I need more of that. There's no point until I get physically full that I would feel that I would like to stop eating. So, and of course, I think there are a lot of people that feel this way about food, maybe certain types of food, they feel that way. Sometimes we might eat the whole piece of cake and then want more and continue doing that. But when I had it yesterday, I was trying to observe it, just to observe the craving itself and allow it to pass away, to relax and allow it to wash away. And by moving back to the actual sensation itself, I was able to use the practice of concentration and right effort during daily life. And in that way, I was able to monitor and sort of mitigate that desire, that craving, that chain reaction that I've been stuck in the past to eat more, to continue eating when I shouldn't. So watching the birth of a physical action and stopping it is one thing. And then eventually, if you continue this over time, you can slow down the birth of the mental actions. And eventually these can be entirely reduced, or the Buddha says that they can be eliminated. Things like greed. So that kind of goes to the idea of cessation of craving. So really, we could simplify dependent origination even more. We have craving that comes up, as far as the mental activity anyway. We have craving that comes up. Craving leads to clinging. That leads to becoming. Essentially, something is born, whether it's a thought, an action, something happens based on that. So when these come into being, they affect how we see our future, how we see our present, and it basically creates a perpetual cycle until we can find a way to diminish some aspects of the wheel of dependent origination. We're just kind of stuck. And granted, we're not, there's no destiny where we have no choice, but it becomes infinitely more difficult to deal with things unless we're able to really find a way to weaken that cycle. So, and this could basically continue into infinity. I mean, unless we find a way to really deal with it, this cycle powers itself and it doesn't lose any energy. It just goes into the background until it comes up again. And then later on, it comes right back. So just in essence, so far, dependent origination shows how larger phenomena come to pass, and it also shows how our future arises based on our thoughts and experiences. And there is a way to basically break the cycle and regain control over what you would like your life to be, or what you would prefer your future to be. So the first thing I would say is it starts during your meditation, because that's where you can find the most quiet. It's a set time that's supposed to be peaceful. You find a wholesome object to use for your meditation. You can use, like we did today, you can use metta, you can use the breath, you can use the body. The Buddha recommended all of these things. And you just have to, during meditation, when hindrances come up, you have to look at it as an opportunity to deal with this cycle, Some of what, when the Buddha was talking about karma is, or kama in the Pali pronunciation, is essentially this cycle. So when you have past issues coming up that cause you restlessness, that's the fruition that's coming into your mind. And that's your opportunity to deal with this and improve your future, and also improve your present, because just letting that go through this process of sort of relaxing and allowing it to dissipate, taking energy out of that cycle is the way through. So basically, though, in the beginning, the first place you can see it for yourself working, because this is a testable thing. If you didn't believe this, you could sit down and test it if you were very restless or very, very greedy feeling. But at first, you have the beginning meditator that sits down, scratching and repositioning and moving. These are the fruition of hindrances. And you'll notice over time you get supposedly better at meditating. And of course, things come up, these feelings still happen, but you're no longer allowing them to dictate your behavior. So that's at first how it's obvious, but then it becomes a more internal process where you're finding more balance. We call it equanimity, one of the Brahma Viharas, that once you get deeper into meditation, you can see that this leads to more balance. So when you are sitting and getting deeper into meditation, you have the desire to move and you don't do it. And then eventually the desire to move stops because the cycle has started to diminish. And then other things start to come up as you're able to sit longer, because the discomfort's not arising, because you're not scratching and things like that. You'll start to be able to really look at the mental phenomena more closely. So things like craving come up. Maybe I would sit there and think about cake, or something that you desire, or something you don't desire, you want it to go away. And you can start to observe that craving with more balance and allow it to pass away. And then after a while, you notice that when you've been doing this consistently and for fairly long periods of time, like half an hour a day or more, then these things start to diminish in your regular life too. So you have less craving come up and you have more control whenever it does come up. You can see it for what it is. So then basically when you do get better at interacting with mental phenomena, you'll notice that not only does the meditation relieve currently existing stress, but the process of dealing with thoughts as they arise is an opportunity to let them go. To see that the process is impersonal. And that's a big component of it. Eventually, you'll start to see that this doesn't really have that much to do with me specifically. It's just a cycle that is playing itself out. And I can choose to involve myself or I can choose not to. But basically, part of that is taking your practice and doing it regularly in a sitting, but also throughout the day. You can, with breathing meditation, you can bring your breath with you throughout the day. With metta meditation, you can do that while you're sitting in a meeting. While you're talking to people, you can have a little bit of metta. Basically, if you're standing, you're using the body as your object of meditation. You wouldn't want to just switch up to use different ones at different times because it helps to be much more familiar with one. But you can find your object of meditation and deepen your concentration while you're going through your normal day. So that starts to help a lot. And then meditation isn't just sitting, it's the practice. The practice is more than sitting. But another part of it is kind of guarding the senses, because the more we come into contact with things like, violent imagery from video games and movies, things like that, sometimes that might increase restlessness. If we come into contact with things that cause us to be tempted to lie, or, if we use intoxicants, basically talking about the precepts, which are what they call the sort of rules of conduct if you want to improve your mind. So not lying, not killing, not stealing, no sexual misconduct, and no intoxicants. So by doing these, you'll actually cause your sittings to be better in meditation, and you'll have less distractions, less hindrances come up in your regular life. But it takes practice. It's not something where you can sit for 4 hours in a day and all of a sudden you're very good at it. It takes a daily observation. You have to observe phenomena without attachment and learn how to interact with the world without creating attachment for yourself. But eventually you don't suffer as much when things do happen that might have made you feel bad in the past, or might be painful, things like that. You can essentially transcend a lot of these things. So as I said, with the precepts, or the idea behind physically avoiding things, it's similar to in meditation. When at first you're sitting for longer, you're not moving and repositioning and scratching your nose, and realize that those things just fade away if you don't give them any energy. So too with physical things. You can start, maybe you were killing some ants that were in your house. Maybe next year you can try to, or maybe starting now, I should say, but hopeful next season you can keep the house cleaner and the ants don't come in and the water doesn't attract them. So it's sometimes a gradual process, but improvement in this will lead to improvement in your mind. But after the physical sense, then you can develop some tranquility in your mind. So essentially, it leads to less attachment when the sense doors present a pleasant, unpleasant, or a neutral object. So when you like something, maybe you won't like it so much that it damages you or someone else. maybe if something is unfavorable, you don't like something someone said, or you don't like the temperature, or you don't like a food that someone's given you. Maybe just note that that's so, and then you can do what you've practiced doing, which once you get to where you can move past craving and observe feeling itself, you'll notice that if you allow the craving to diminish, for example, with the unpleasant temperature, you can basically sit through that, and eventually you will stop resisting it. Once you accept the temperature, you will note that you feel cooler than you would prefer, or warmer, but it doesn't really matter. It becomes comfortable because you're no longer resisting the reality that you're presented with. And then eventually, once you get better at those things, then you can start to really work on developing insight, and it all works together, obviously. It's not just a 1, 2, 3 step. But you can start to understand the nature of reality once you're able to see a little bit further down. At first, you can just see the birth of actions. Then you can see, basically, you can see the craving pretty easily, and then you can see feeling. And then you can start to kind of look a little bit more closely at reality itself as it's presented to you in this moment, if you're not running around trying to get away from something or to get something. So equanimity helps a lot once you're able to understand and develop that, but it leads to less tendency to attach. At first, I think really I've always liked the idea of meditation being a lens, sort of like, you're looking through this lens to see things more clearly, to get a better perception of reality. And by practicing occasionally or daily and noticing when engaging in bad behavior, including the mental behavior, or when you're swept away by emotion, eventually with enough practice, you can start to improve your lens. You can see things a little bit more clearly. Then eventually, once you do practice more, you can begin to see the truth of the Buddhist teaching. Some of the deeper truths of the Buddhist teaching can seem very academic at first. Things like no self or non-self or not self or whatever people would like to call it. Basically the impersonal nature of reality are difficult to understand, and people could study them for years in an academic sense. And you may never come to an understanding of it, because it's like trying to explain the color red to someone that can't see red. You can't. It's not possible. You can talk about it, you can talk all around it, but essentially, truly understanding it, you have to walk the path yourself and see these things for yourself. So I thought this was a good image because it's a reference to the Diamond Sutra a little bit, the diamond that cuts through illusion. So as your lens sharpens, you can begin to see the Dharma. And then eventually, essentially, we all become our own teachers. So the image of the scientist who's developed, a microscope or even an electron microscope that can look so deeply into phenomena that arise in the mind that you can see how they come about, how they pass away. So using the teaching to observe phenomena as they really are is the equivalent of like getting a PhD and making your own discoveries. I'm almost out of time, but I did want to go over a very short part of a short sutta from Samyutta Nikaya. Sariputra had a monk friend who came to him, another monk that had a companion that reverted back to lay life. He no longer wanted to be a monastic. And he told Sariputra about this friend. And he said, Sariputra said, "This is what happens, friend, when one whose sense doors are unguarded, who is immoderate in eating, not given to wakefulness, like that monk. As long as he lives, it will be impossible for him to maintain the holy life in all its fullness and purity. But if a monk guards his sense doors, is moderate in eating, and given to watchfulness, then it will be possible for him, as long as he lives, to maintain the holy life in all its fullness and purity. And how, friend, does one guard the sense doors? In this, a monk, seeing an object with the eye, does not seize hold of either its general appearance or its details, because anyone dwelling with the eye faculty uncontrolled could be overwhelmed by cupidity and dejection, evil and unwholesome states of mind. Therefore, he practices to control the eye faculty, guards it, and gains control over it. So one guards the sense doors. And the teaching that he gave goes over the ear, nose, tongue, body, and the mind as well. So basically that's it. Just train well. I think the most important thing is, as with many of the Buddhist teachings, there is the first and second verses of Dhammapada. The first talks about the mind essentially being burdened like a ox-drawn cart. And the second one references a man who goes without burden, as one who is followed by their own shadow, essentially. I can't remember the wording. But I think this is really important because this is an illustration. It's one of the clues that are all throughout the suttas and all the teachings that the Buddha gave, that right effort and right concentration are not trying to get away, not trying to make reality be something it is. It's just a man gazing at his own shadow. So you can gaze at your own object of concentration in the same way. It's there with you. It's there to help you all the time. So just try to guard your sense doors. Thank you.